Go back to India. The words didn't just cut through the room, they detonated. The debate hall, packed with reporters, cameras, and an anxious audience, froze in disbelief. A silence heavy enough to suffocate swept across the space. You could feel the air change. Thick with tension, thick with history. The insult had been hurled with a smirk, as if meant to humiliate. As if meant to remind Kash Patel of a place he did not belong. But in that moment, something larger was happening. This wasn't simply one candidate attacking another. This was a message broadcast to millions, echoing a centuries-old question of identity, belonging, and patriotism in America. Every eye turned toward Patel. His face didn't flinch. He didn't look away. The cameras zoomed in, hunting for anger, humiliation, or rage. But instead, what they found was calm. A kind of unshakable calm that felt heavier than the insult itself. The kind of calm that belongs only to someone who knows exactly who he is, and exactly where he stands. For a split second, time seemed to bend. In living rooms across America, families watching gasped. On social media, clips were already being uploaded, captions screaming outrage. But here in the hall, it was quiet, so quiet that the sound of someone coughing in the back row felt like a thunderclap. And in that silence, one truth was undeniable. This was no longer a debate. This was no longer about policy or points on a scoreboard. This had become a battle over what it means to be an American. The insult echoed louder in the stillness, its cruelty amplified by the hush. It wasn't just directed at Patel. It was aimed at every immigrant who had ever been told they didn't belong, at every child who had been asked where they were really from, at every family that had built a life here only to be questioned for their accents, their names, or the color of their skin. The nation held its breath. Would he snap back with fury? Would he stumble under the weight of the slur? Or would he choose something else? Something that would flip the script in front of millions? The lights bore down. The cameras leaned in. The villain smirked, certain of victory. But what came next? No one was prepared to hear. In the seconds after the insult landed, it would have been easy to dismiss it as just another ugly moment in politics. After all, America has seen its share of cheap shots, its share of reckless words tossed around like weapons. But this was different. This wasn't just a personal jab at Kash Patel. It was a line that touched the raw nerve of America's deepest struggle. Who belongs and who decides? For generations, the phrase "go back" has haunted the margins of immigrant families. It has been hurled at workers in factories, whispered at students in classrooms, spat at neighbors on sidewalks. Always the same message: you are other, you are less, you are not one of us. And yet, time and again, those same families have answered with something stronger than hate. They answered with work, with service, with loyalty to a country that often doubted them. That's why this moment mattered. It wasn't simply about Karoline Leavitt trying to rattle her opponent on a debate stage. It was about a theater of history playing out in front of millions. Every immigrant family watching knew the weight of those words. Every progressive voice who had fought for inclusion recognized the wound. This was not politics as usual. This was the story of America itself unfolding in real time. The cameras caught the smirk on Leavitt's face, the satisfied gleam in her eyes. She thought she had struck a blow that would silence Patel, that would reduce him to the caricature she wanted to paint. But her arrogance overlooked something fundamental. Patel was not standing there as one man. In that moment, he stood for countless Americans whose roots reach beyond these borders, but whose loyalty runs deeper than any insult could touch. And that is why the silence in the room felt so electric, because everyone knew instinctively that whatever came next would define this exchange. Would Patel sink into the trap, swallowed by anger? Or would he rise, carrying with him a truth that could pierce through generations of prejudice? What Leavitt had not realized was that America itself was watching for an answer. Not just an answer to her words, but an answer to the question of belonging. Can an immigrant family's child, born here or not, serve this nation with full dignity? Can heritage be weaponized against patriotism? Can a slur still sting when it is hurled against someone who has given his career to defending the very country now questioning his identity? The debate stage had become something else entirely. It was no longer about policy platforms or sound bites. It was no longer about who won or lost. It was about the soul of America, about whether the old ghosts of exclusion and suspicion would rise again, or whether dignity and composure would carve a new path forward. And as Patel stood there, staring calmly into the heat of the cameras, it became clear he understood the weight of the moment. This was not just his insult to answer. Karoline Leavitt was never the type to tiptoe into a room. She stormed in. Young, ambitious, and eager to carve her name into the headlines, she thrived on the shock of disruption. For her, politics wasn't about steady service or careful persuasion. It was about impact, loud, unapologetic, headline-grabbing impact. She understood something about the modern, political arena. Outrage could be currency, and she spent it freely. Her rise had been meteoric. A former press aide turned congressional candidate. Leavitt built her brand on defiance. Every soundbite, every clip, every viral jab was designed for maximum friction. She didn't hide from controversy. She chased it. The more divisive her words, the more oxygen they seemed to gather. In an age where attention equals power, she wielded controversy like a megaphone. And yet beneath the polished bravado and the carefully rehearsed lines, her contradictions ran deep. She championed American values, wrapping herself in slogans about freedom, patriotism, and tradition. She spoke about protecting the heart of the nation, defending its future, guarding its culture. But her version of American often excluded those who didn't look like her, speak like her, or trace their family tree to the same roots. Time and again, her rhetoric drew fire, dismissing diversity programs as weakness, painting immigrants as threats rather than builders, mocking communities that had long been part of the American story. Each remark found its way into clips replayed on social media, sparking outrage among progressives, applause among her base, and endless cycles of debate in between. To Leavitt, this was success. Controversy meant relevance. Relevance meant power. But controversy is a dangerous currency. It buys the spotlight, yes, but it also burns trust, alienates allies, and plants seeds of downfall. Those who thrive on outrage often forget that outrage is a double-edged sword. It can turn swiftly, leaving its wielder exposed. That's what made her words on that stage so revealing. When she told Kash Patel to go back to India, it wasn't simply a slip or a miscalculated outburst. It was the culmination of a pattern, a worldview, a hunger to score the next viral moment. She believed she was untouchable, that her youth, her boldness, her sharp tongue made her immune to the consequences that had brought others down. But arrogance has a way of writing its own ending. The insult, dripping with disdain, was more than a jab. It was a window into her weakness, a need to belittle in order to rise, a reliance on exclusion to define patriotism, a belief that America's story was hers alone to narrate. What she failed to see was that every word revealed her fear. Fear of losing the stage, fear of being forgotten, fear that her brand of politics could not survive without tearing someone else down. The audience in that hall recognized it instantly. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the ugliness beneath the remark. Others smirked or clapped, delighted at the cruelty of it. But to millions watching at home, the moment was crystal clear. Leavitt was not fighting for American values. She was fighting for her own reflection in the mirror of fame. And that, more than anything, is what made her dangerous. Because arrogance doesn't just wound opponents, it corrodes the very ground beneath the person who wields it. In chasing shock, Leavitt had revealed her hand. She was not the steady voice of principle she pretended to be. She was the storm that fed on chaos, certain she could ride it forever. But storms burn out, and the higher they climb, the harder they fall. In that debate hall, under the white-hot glare of the cameras, Karoline Leavitt believed she was winning. She believed her words would reduce Kash Patel to silence, that the insult would stick, that the viral moment would belong to her. She believed the rules of downfall did not apply to her. But arrogance often writes its own ending. Kash Patel did not begin life with a silver spoon or a safety net. He began it with a story, the story of his parents, immigrants from India who arrived in America with more hope than money, more grit than guarantees. They worked long hours, took the jobs others overlooked, and built a life brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. In their small home, Kash learned two truths that would shape him forever. Nothing is given, and everything is earned. From childhood, Patel understood he was different. His skin color, his name, His heritage, these marked him in classrooms, where he was often the only one who looked the way he did. The taunts were casual at first, then sharper as he grew older. "Go back to India" was not a phrase he first heard on a debate stage. It was whispered in locker rooms, muttered in playgrounds, and shouted by those who couldn't imagine that America was big enough for families like his. But what set Kash apart was not the absence of pain. It was his response to it. Every insult became fuel. Every closed door became another reason to fight harder, climb higher, prove wrong the voices that told him he didn't belong. Education became his weapon. Determined to serve, he pursued law, focusing on justice and the principles that define America at its best. He didn't chase money or comfort, he chased responsibility. He entered the legal world not as an opportunist, but as a fighter for fairness, taking cases that mattered and standing firm when the easy path would have been to give in. His career pulled him into national service, where his expertise and dedication earned him a place as a national security advisor. Step by step, he built a resume that reflected more than ambition. It reflected loyalty to a country that had not always welcomed him, but one he refused to stop believing in. Through it all, Patel carried his family's sacrifices like a compass. He remembered the long nights his parents worked, the small joys they afforded only after weeks of saving, the pride they felt in watching him wear a suit and argue in a courtroom. For them, his achievements were not just his. They were proof that their gamble on America had meaning. To Kash, loyalty wasn't abstract. It wasn't a word to shout at rallies. It was the look on his parents' faces when they saw the country. They had chosen honor the son they had raised. But the path was never without shadows. Patel faced skepticism not only from those who hurled open racism, but also from those who doubted quietly, those who assumed he couldn't lead, couldn't represent, couldn't embody the values etched into the nation's story. He encountered barriers invisible to the eye but heavy on the spirit. The higher he rose, the more he understood that for people like him, success was never neutral. Every step forward carried the weight of proving that immigrants and their children belonged in the rooms where decisions were made. The silence after the insult was electric. The stage lights burned hotter, the air thick with disbelief. For a moment, it felt as if the entire nation was watching with its breath caught in its chest. The moderator stammered, attempting to regain order, but the words barely carried over the low rumble of the audience. Murmurs swelled into whispers, whispers into outrage. Some gasped audibly, others muttered in disapproval, and still, a few clapped nervously as though applauding the shock itself. Karoline Leavitt, sensing the spotlight was still hers, refused to back down. Rather than retreating, she smirked. The corner of her lips curled with satisfaction, as though she had delivered not a slur but a victory. She leaned toward her microphone, feeding on the tension like oxygen. "I said what everyone's thinking," she declared, her voice sharp, her tone dripping with defiance. "This is America. If you want to represent it, maybe start by respecting it." The words landed heavy, but so did the arrogance behind them. Gasps turned to groans. The moderator raised a hand, trying to interject, his voice cracking slightly, under the strain of control slipping through his fingers. "Ms. Leavitt, please. Let's maintain respect on this stage." But it was futile. She was basking in the chaos, her eyes glinting with the hunger of someone who knew that outrage meant headlines, and headlines meant power. Across from her, Kash Patel sat in silence. His face remained steady, measured, unshaken. But the calm was not emptiness, it was restraint. Behind his eyes was a storm. Every insult he had endured, every slight against his family, every barrier he had overcome had converged into this moment. The insult wasn't new, but the stage was. This time, it wasn't whispered in a schoolyard or muttered in passing. It was hurled on live television, into millions of homes, under the banner of politics. The audience leaned forward, waiting. Would Patel crack? Would he lash out? Would he fall into the trap she had set? Karoline smirked wider, her confidence swelling. She doubled down again, her voice dripping with disdain. "This isn't about diversity hires or feel-good stories. This is about American values. And frankly, some people just don't get it.